Welcome to our deep dive today.
Okay.
And we're going to unpack something that might seem a little dry at first, the
Yeah.
U.S. Code.
Okay.
But trust me, this is all about understanding how those big federal laws actually have a real impact on your life right here in your community.
Yeah.
It's time to think and act locally.
Absolutely.
And
That's right.
for this deep dive, we're using excerpts from
Yeah.
the United States Code itself, so we're going straight to the source.
Yeah.
Get ready for some aha moments as we uncover how this massive collection of laws actually works
Uh-huh.
and what it means for you.
We will uncover how the U.S. Code is organized.
Right.
It's like this giant library of laws.
Right.
And we'll even trace its history,
Oh, cool.
which is more interesting than you might think.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
All right, and we'll even delve into the Constitution to see where these laws get their power from.
Yes.
Did you know the U.S. Code doesn't always explicitly say
Oh, that's right.
which parts of the Constitution
Exactly.
give Congress the authority to make those laws?
Yeah.
It's like the detective game,
Uh-huh.
tracing each law back to its source.
It's true, and that's a key part of understanding how the system works.
Right.
But first, let's tackle the structure of the U.S. Code.
Okay.
Have you ever wondered what's with all those titles?
Yes?
Subtitles
Yeah.
and sections?
Honestly, yes.
Okay.
It can seem pretty overwhelming at first glance.
Yeah.
Help us break it down.
Imagine trying to find a specific book in a library with millions of volumes and no organizational system.
Oh, my.
That's what it was like before the U.S. Code.
Oh, wow.
Now it's neatly divided into 50 titles, each covering a broad subject area.
Okay.
For example, Title 18 deals with crimes, Title 26 is all about taxes,
Uh-huh.
and so on.
Okay, so it's like a giant filing cabinet helping us find the specific laws we need.
Exactly.
Okay.
Within each title, you have subtitles for more specific categories,
Okay.
then chapters, and finally, individual sections containing the actual text of the laws. It's a hierarchy, like the Dewey Decimal System for laws.
That makes sense.
Okay.
So if I wanted to look up a law about, say, national parks,
Uh-huh.
I go to the title that covers public lands
Mm-hmm.
and then narrow it down from there.
You got it.
Okay.
And to make it even easier,
Okay.
there's an index at the beginning of each title, subtitle, and chapter.
Oh, wow.
Think of it like a roadmap
Okay.
to help you navigate the code.
Got it.
And if you prefer to search online,
Mm-hmm.
the Cornell Law website has the entire U.S. Code available for free.
Oh, that's super handy.
Yeah,
But you mentioned earlier that not all federal laws are actually in the U.S. Code.
that's right.
What's the deal with that?
Some laws called uncodified statutes exist outside the main code.
What?
They're like separate legal documents that haven't been incorporated into the main U.S. code structure.
Oh.
A good example is the IRS Reform and Restructuring Act of 1998.
Okay, so there are these special laws floating around out there
Exactly.
that aren't part of the main collection.
And to find those,
Wow.
you'd have to search for the original statute at large, which is basically the official record of laws passed by Congress.
Oh, okay.
It highlights that the U.S. Code, while extensive,
Mhm.
isn't always the final word.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got this organized system, but how did we even get to this idea of codifying laws in the first place?
Yeah.
It wasn't always this way.
Not at all.
Okay.
Before the U.S. Code, finding a specific law was like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Oh, my goodness.
Laws were basically assigned random numbers with no real organization by subject.
Oh, wow.
Imagine trying to research a legal issue back then.
Right.
It was a nightmare.
Yeah, that does not sound good.
Oh,
So how did they finally bring some order to this legal chaos?
well, the need for a better system became clear over time,
Right.
and there were several attempts to organize the laws.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until after the Civil War
Oh, yeah.
that the idea of codification really took hold. They started grouping laws by subject, creating the structure we see in the U.S. Code today.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
A clear, organized system is essential, especially when we're talking about something as important as laws.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, we've talked about finding laws in the U.S. Code,
All right.
but how do we understand where those laws actually get their power from?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
The U.S. Code itself doesn't always explicitly tell us
Oh.
which parts of the Constitution give Congress the power to make specific laws.
Interesting.
It's like having a rule book without knowing where the rules came from.
So we need to do a little detective work
Yes.
and trace each law back to its source in the Constitution.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's why understanding the Constitution is so important.
Yes.
We need to know which parts of it authorize Congress to make certain types of laws.
Right.
All right, so let's dive into that.
Okay.
What are some of the key constitutional provisions that underpin the laws we find in the U.S. Code?
Wow.
I'm ready to play constitutional detective.
We're going to get into that right now. Welcome back.
Thanks.
We're continuing our deep dive into the U.S. Code.
Right.
And today we're going to see how these federal laws actually play out in your life and your community.
Okay.
Remember, it's all about thinking and acting locally.
Exactly. We've uncovered the structure of the U.S. Code and even dipped our toes into its history.
Right.
Now it's time to put on our detective hats and see how these legal threads weave themselves into our everyday lives.
Let's start with something that affects us all.
Okay.
The environment.
Yep.
Remember, Title 15 Commerce and Trade,
Huh?
tucked away in that section, is the Clean Air Act.
Okay.
A landmark piece of legislation that's had a huge impact on air quality all across the country,
Right.
including your own neighborhood.
So the Clean Air Act is a federal law passed by Congress and part of the U.S. Code.
Yes.
But how does it actually get implemented locally?
Right.
It's not like we have federal agents on every street corner monitoring air quality, right?
You're right. That's where the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, comes in. Okay.
They're the ones who develop and enforce the specific rules and regulations that put the Clean Air Act into action.
I see. So the EPA takes those broad goals from the Clean Air Act
yeah.
and turns them into concrete actions at the local level.
That's right.
What would be an example of that?
Think about the limits on emissions from factories and power plants.
Okay.
The EPA sets those standards based on the Clean Air Act, and those regulations have a direct impact on the air quality in communities near those facilities.
So we've got the big picture goals set by the federal law, and then the EPA steps in to make sure those goals are actually met on the ground in our cities and towns.
That's exactly how it works.
Gotcha.
And this pattern repeats in many other areas of the U.S. Code.
Okay.
Let's take education as another example.
Right.
Title 20 of the U.S. Code deals with education and includes laws like the Every Student Succeeds Act.
Yeah.
The goal is to improve education for all students across the country.
That's a great goal. But education is mostly handled at the state and local level, right?
Right. So how does a federal law like that actually affect what happens in my local school district?
Well, the Department of Education plays a key role in translating that federal law into action.
Okay.
They create guidelines that influence curriculum standards, funding formulas, and even special education services.
Okay.
These guidelines often have a direct impact on the decisions made by local school boards and even the materials used in your child's classroom.
So even though we think of education as a local issue, there's this federal layer that can significantly impact how things work in our schools.
That's right. It shows how interconnected things really are.
Okay.
Now, you might be wondering about those uncodified statutes we talked about earlier,
Yes.
those laws that exist outside the main U.S. Code.
Right.
Do they have any impact locally?
Actually, that was going to be my next question.
Okay.
It seems like they would be easy to overlook if they're not part of the main U.S. Code.
You'd be surprised how much impact they can have.
Oh, okay.
Take the IRS Reform and Restructuring Act of 1998, for example.
Wow.
Even though it's not codified, it changed how the IRS operates. And those changes affect every taxpayer in the country.
So it's like a behind-the-scenes law that still has the power to influence our lives.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that the U.S. Code is a great starting point, but it's not the only source of federal law that we should be aware of.
Okay, so it's got me thinking, we've been focusing on how federal laws can impact us locally.
Right.
But can we as citizens actually use our knowledge of the U.S. Code to influence those laws?
That's a fantastic question, and the answer is absolutely yes.
Really?
Understanding the U.S. Code, how laws are made, and where to find information can be incredibly empowering.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Okay.
But how do we actually do that? Give us some concrete examples of how we can use our knowledge of the U.S. Code to make a difference locally.
It all starts with awareness. Simply knowing which federal laws and regulations affect your community allows you to engage in local decision-making in a more informed way. For example, if your city council is considering a new zoning ordinance, you can use your knowledge of the U.S. Code to see if there are any federal laws related to environmental protection or historical preservation that might apply.
That's a great point. It's like having insider knowledge that helps you participate in local discussions more effectively.
Exactly. And if you're passionate about a specific issue, you can use your understanding of the U.S. Code to advocate for change.
Okay.
You can contact your elected officials, submit comments during public hearings, or even join advocacy groups working on those issues.
So it's not just about understanding the laws, it's about using that knowledge to shape them and make sure they represent our values.
That's the power of thinking and acting locally.
Okay.
When you combine your knowledge of the U.S. Code with the passion for your community, you become a force to be reckoned with.
This is all very inspiring. We've explored how federal laws play out locally, from environmental protection to education, and now we're seeing how we can actually use this knowledge to make a difference in our communities. What a journey.
It's been an incredible exploration so far.
Yeah.
But there's one more crucial step.
Okay.
Knowing where to find the information you need to make all of this happen.
Right.
So in our final part, we'll equip you with the tools and resources to become a true Think and Act Locally pro. Stay tuned.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into the U.S. Code. We've gone from understanding the structure of this massive legal document to seeing how it plays out in our everyday lives.
And today it's all about empowerment.
Okay.
We're going to equip you with the tools and resources you need to truly think and act locally like a pro.
We've been emphasizing how seemingly distant federal laws can actually have real-world consequences in our communities. But as we've said before, knowledge without action is like a book left unread.
Exactly. So let's talk about how you can turn your understanding of the U.S. Code into informed action. First things first, where can people even find this massive legal document?
Right, it's not like we all have a copy of the U.S. Code sitting on our bedside tables.
Yeah.
So where do we go to actually access this information?
Luckily, we live in the digital age. The Cornell Law website, which we mentioned earlier, is a fantastic resource. It has the entire U.S. Code online, and it's completely free and searchable. You can browse by title search for keywords or even look up laws by their popular names.
So Cornell Law is our go-to for actually reading the code itself. But what if you want more context? Like, say you're interested in the history behind a particular law, how it was debated and passed by Congress. Where would you go for that kind of information?
That's where the Government Publishing Office website comes in. They have a treasure trove of information on how laws are made. You can find congressional reports, hearing transcripts, even the actual debates that happened on the floor of Congress. It's a fascinating glimpse behind the scenes of the legislative process.
So we've got the text of the law and its backstory. But what about those all-important regulations we discussed? Where do those live? The ones that really spell out how the laws are implemented.
For that, you'll want to head to the ECFR, the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations. This is where federal agencies like the EPA or the FDA lay out the specific rules and procedures for putting those laws from the U.S. Code into action.
This is amazing. It's like we have access to an entire legal library right at our fingertips.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, it can still feel pretty overwhelming. Any tips for our listeners on how to navigate all of these resources without getting lost in a sea of legal jargon?
My advice is to start with a clear goal in mind.
Go ahead.
What specific issue are you interested in? What local impact are you concerned about?
Right.
Once you have that focus, use keywords related to your issue to search the U.S. Code, the GPO website, or the ECFR. It's all about being strategic and targeted.
So don't try to boil the ocean. Focus on what matters most to you and start small.
Exactly. And if you hit a roadblock, don't be afraid to ask for help. Your local library, a legal aid organization, or even a law school clinic can often provide guidance.
Those are great practical tips. But let's talk about putting this knowledge into action. We've been saying think and act locally, but what does that actually look like in the real world?
It can take many forms. It could be attending local government meetings, writing to your elected officials, even joining a community group that's working on issues you care about. The key is to use your understanding of the U.S. Code to inform your actions and make your voice heard.
So it's about turning knowledge into action. It's about being an active citizen.
Absolutely. And remember, understanding the U.S. Code isn't just about knowing the rules. It's about understanding the power dynamics at play. Who benefits from these laws? Who might be disproportionately impacted? Asking those kinds of questions can be very powerful.
This deep dive has been so much more than just learning about legal text. It's about understanding the framework of our society, the levers of power, and how we can participate in creating a more just and equitable world.
Well said. And that brings us right back to our core message. Think and act locally. When you combine knowledge of the U.S. Code with a passion for your community, you can truly make a difference.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the U.S. Code. We hope you found this exploration as insightful as we have.
Remember, the law is not some static, impenetrable document. It's a living thing shaped by history interpretation and, most importantly, by the actions of engaged citizens like you.
So go forth, fellow deep divers, armed with your newfound knowledge and a passion for your community. Think and act locally, and together let's create a world where laws reflect our shared values and aspirations.